We want the retention and the immediate opening of the Independent Living Fund. And a national social care system that is independent of local authority administered care and support. We want a living wage for all, but what we also want as disabled people is to be given sufficient support costs so that we can pay our personal assistants and our social care workers at a rate that matches the level of skills, experience and aptitude you need to have to do those jobs. We want proper access to work support to enable disabled people to enter employment on a level playing field with non-disabled people, ending the vile question of whether we are or we aren't worth the minimum wage. Such measures would not only create a fairer society and reduce the inequality gap, but would also save public money in the longer term. It's a sign of how far right the debate has drifted that the kind of demands that are set out in the UK Disabled People's Manifesto get us regarded as extremists and radicals. I was reminded this week that in 1995, John Smith actually voted against the Disability Discrimination Act, siding instead with disabled campaigners who were calling instead for disability civil rights legislation. In the current climate, just the ambition of equality and human rights seems to have been abandoned. We know that austerity costs lives and it breaches human rights. The closure of the Independent Living Fund in June 2015, which if elected in May, Labour will still go ahead with, will lead to the UK being in breach of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We also know that austerity is a choice, and that money can be found for other priorities. Money can be found for the rich to continue to increase their wealth, and as people talked about today, for arms. And we also know, as the Scottish referendum, Syriza's victory in Greece and Podemos' rise in Spain show, that there is a real desire among people for an alternative to austerity. Labour's failure to oppose austerity, their insistence on sticking to Tory spending plans, the distance between frontbench policy and the kind of vision set out in the UK Disabled People's Manifesto effectively says to disabled people that in the current climate the Labour Party is prepared to dispense with human rights, not only of disabled people but of all those impacted by austerity, prepared to dispense with human rights in pursuit of neoliberal goals. Those of us here today know that different choices are not only possible but would lead to better outcomes. The question we have within DPAC is, if the Labour front bench continue not to listen, as it seems clear they're not going to now, until at least after the general election, what then? We're already having really hard arguments with deaf and disabled people about the importance of voting, about how not all the parties really are the same, and an argument we keep, it's awful having, but how UKIP really isn't the answer for disabled people. As anger and disillusionment grow, it's important we're able to provide the answers, that we can show a path forwards, not only of the vision we want to see, but also for how we get there.
Hello? Yes, I'm working. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to follow from what Alan's been saying, because we can't tell disabled people to vote at Labour because, frankly, the front bench aren't worth voting for, as far as I'm concerned. They are not willing to give anything to disabled people, they're not willing to support us in any way. There are twice as many disabled voters in this country as there are trade union members, and we really are going to have to try and say to the Labour front bench, you have to take notice of what we want from you, and you have to be willing to provide it, otherwise we won't be voting for you.
Thanks. Roger Lewis, National Steering Committee of DPAC. I'm also a local government officer in adult social care in Lambeth, South London. I'd just like to add to Alan's thanks. What I want to do in this room is we know, with all the criticisms we have of the Labour Party, that you represent the absolute best of the Labour Party. And the very large number of Labour Party members there are out there who see your vision of the Labour Party as what it should represent, and we very much recognise that. I'll just single out one other individual here for our thanks, which is Mark Walker, who without doubt has been one of our leading supporters over the 4 years that we've been fighting back against austerity. And that brings me on to what I want to talk about, which is of course the flip side of the government's attacks on the welfare benefit system, on disabled people through the work capability assessments and sanctioning, and through the scapegoating of people on benefits as scrounges, cheese lies and all the rest of it. This has been a battering ram that they now turn and can use against working people as well. Because the fight to make being on benefits such a brutalised and degrading experience has made it much easier for this government to attack those of us who are in work by driving down our wages, driving down our working conditions, as the ever-present threat of the pool of unemployed to replace you means that workers feel they've got no option but to accept worse conditions. And of course that brings us down to the question of the trade unions, because this is the real question I've got here today. Of all the encouraging statements that I'm hearing, the willpower, the determination to fight to make the Labour Party what you want it to be, my real concern is the timescale here in mind. What I'm hearing is the beginnings of a 5-year, a 15-year, a 20-year plan to recover the Labour Party. The reality is out there on the streets, the clock is running out. We now face the government, we're talking about 90 days to the election. Local councils around the council are making their cuts decisions now for the next 3 years. I live in Lambeth, that's a Labour council, 99% of the councillors, Labour Party. It's a commissioning council, it's a privatising council. Its priorities are first stage of the consultation, boost management structures and the middle management, bring in commissioners, bring in people from the public sector, from the private sector to oversee the outsourcing of those services and frontline services going. That's what the reality we've got. At the end of that, we are facing in 3 years' time the reality that there will be no local government in this country. Lambeth's Steve Bullock's vision, a commissioning council that meets twice a year, once to set the budget and once to commission services. And with that goes to the heart of our trade union movement, the strength of our trade union movement in the public sector. And this brings me on to the question of the trade union leadership in this country. Because I'm sorry to say, as a member of Unison, that my General Secretary, the General Secretary of the Unite Union, and the General Secretary of the GMB Union have betrayed working people in this country. They're walking out on the public sector strikes, helping the women who are fighting over pensions, and they're most disgracefully last year over what could have been a coordinated series of attacks over public sector pay, leaving fighting unions like the PPCs out on their own and their memberships isolated and open to victimisation. And what we've seen in the last week has been even more shameful to see Emma Trustee hand another 1.4, 1.5, whatever it was, £1 million to the Labour Party on top of their normal donation. That was the money for a fight and health service that him and his unions and the unionship leadership in Unison walked away from a few weeks ago. That's the urgency of our task, and that's why I think we have to be blunt and honest about that. But this is the challenge that you face in Labour. That it's not going to be a matter of do anything to get Labour elected for the next 5-6 years, because we won't have anything left out. You have walked away from the branch group farm membership, which is going to achieve the sorts of changes that you really want to be in society. DPAC will continue to work with each and every one of you during this election campaign and after. But we need to see that discussion taking place in a much more direct and speeded up process.
My name's Paula Peters, and from Disabled People Against Cuts, and I'm showing you my t-shirt. Maximus, same circus, different clowns. It's the same work capability assessment, but a different contracts are now in place. They are an American company, also known as International Healthcare, who are involved in the privatisation of our NHS, also known as health management. They have done, the record in the US is appalling, $5 billion worth of insurance fraud on Medicaid. Sex discrimination cases, disability discrimination cases, racial discrimination cases. They won't employ Black Americans to work on their contracts. They claim they're an equal opportunity employer. They're in Saudi Arabia. They put out a vacancy recently, and it was only open to men and Saudi nationals. Women were excluded from applying for the job. This outfit had the legal software system in place. Atos still own the code to this software program, and they got £10 million for that code last year, Atos. But Maximus are being paid twice as much as what Atos ever were to run this contract for 5 years. For the next 5 years, from the 1st of March They're carrying on with the work capability assessment as is. Now, we won in court 2 years ago the work capability assessment against mental health claimants. And I'm sure you heard about it. It was ruled discriminatory, placed mental health claimants at a substantial disadvantage. And I remember how we got that court case, because we gave the judge names of people who had died because of the stress, the fear, and the untold harm this horrendous process has done. And he looked at the DWP barrister and he said, "Do not deny those names to me. I will not be long with that judgment." And 4 weeks later, we got the ruling we wanted. The court case is going to happen. Now, we know that we've been very instrumental in exposing ATOS, but the entire work capability assessment process to the top, with Ian Duncan-Smith, with David Cameron, with the rhetoric they use, calling us scroungers, fraudsters, work shy. Now, 2 years ago, we had the closing ceremony of the ATOS Games because ATOS sponsored the Olympics here in London, and we had a week of action. And I have to say today, the campaigners who were out with us on that week of action are no longer here today because they died. Because of the stress, the fear, and the horrendous harm these processes are doing. Now, what we did, when we heard they were coming in last October, we decided, well, we've got to do something about this, because Maximus said that, well, we're not going to face the same protests that Atos did, and we're not going to tolerate protests outside the assessment centres. Yeah, so they threw the gauntlet down right there. And here it is. On the 2nd of March, and this isn't just in London, we're having protests in Glasgow, we're having protests in Sheffield, Brighton, Truro, Manchester, Reading. We've got 16, and in Toronto, Canada. We are now gone global. We've got a thunderclap on Facebook and Twitter. You can sign up to that and share the message, because we want to make sure that this is inclusive for everyone. And I have to say this, Maximus also had the GP sickness contract. You're off work for 4 weeks, you will face a Maximus medical. So your trade union members off sick for 4 weeks, you're facing Maximus as well. And I'll tell you something now, they're a very, very bad outfit who make Atos look pretty good. And we need your help. Find out where the nearest action to you is. In London, Ealing, Balham, Croydon. And Central London, we're at Queen Anne's Gate. And I'll tell you something, Ian Duncan-Smith, we're coming. We only have to put a notice of an action and then shut down the DWP before we even get there.
We'll be there.
But we need your help now. So that on the 2nd of March, and this is to the unions, any one of you can have an impairment. Any one of you can face the work capability assessment. Go for a PIP assessment. And all of you who are rank and file trade union members on minimum wage are going to go through universal credit. And you're going to face sanctions if you're underemployed, because they're going to pressurise you. We need your support with this action. On the 2nd of March, come out on the streets and join us. Get your t-shirts, get your banners, let's make loads of noise, and let's say to Maximus and Ian Duncan-Smith, we want the WCA scrapped, we want sanctions to go, we want the work programme to go, and we say no more to private contractors in the welfare state. Enough is enough.
There's a differential age profile in this meeting, it's important us for the young boys.
Hi there. So I want to first I want to thank the previous speakers. I think that DPAC actually by far the most inspirational from campaigns going at the moment, and I think that's really, really exciting. Sorry? Can you hear me better now? Sorry about that. Okay, but I want to do a bit of audience interaction here. So can everyone raise their hands if they think that privatisation is really good? Austerity, really good. Crap. 0 hour contracts? No, okay. Because I think that imagining that I was an alien from outer space coming to this meeting, I get the impression that we need to convince ourselves that these things are bad, and we don't. We absolutely don't. And I also get the impression that the way that we can win against these things is by having lots of really good facts and figures and lots of really good arguments. But that's also not the case. We're not going to win by convincing the rich and the most powerful to do what we want. We're going to win on the basis of organising, on the basis of power, on the basis of taking on capital. Now, I came to this meeting really excited about what we're going to do. As far as I can see, we need to do 3 things. As far as I can see, we've done none of them so far. Thing number 1, organise a basic set of demands. Obviously, there's going to be some disagreement in this room, but basically we're all on the same page. Housing, welfare state, trade union rights, etc., etc., etc. 10 minutes to discuss that, fine. Thing number 2, which we've got nowhere near yet, deciding strategy. So if we're going to go into the next post-election negotiations, we need to be working out what we're saying and what we're willing to do. Are we willing to say that if the Labour government commits austerity, we'll bring down the government before the election? That's something we need to discuss. I'm not sure what I think, but that's something we need to discuss. If we're going to make threats, they need to be credible. And thing number 3, we need to be able to build power. It's not enough to have our left-wing MPs, who I have a lot of time for and a lot of respect for, doing all the work for us. We need to build our own power, because once these negotiations go on, they will be under a huge amount of pressure from the Labour right, from the Tories, from the Tory press, and there needs to be pressure on our side as well. We need to be able to build our own power. And at the moment, I don't think that we're capable of doing that. So I'm sorry that I'll be a lot more negative, and I'll be saying things that may be a bit more disagreeable than things that have been going on in the past. But I just feel that we've been here for 4 hours. We've had lots of interesting things, lots of things that I agree with, and in fact lots of things that are inspiring as well. But we need to go on from that. We need to decide what we're doing next, and that needs to start now!
Behind you. There. Bring it round.
Hi, my name is Joss Bell. I should say that I am registered disabled, so that picks up from Paula and the amazing campaign that you've been involved with. I'm also chair of the Social Health Association for London, member of the Safe Vision Hospital Campaign Steering Group, and also involved with the Save Our Hospitals campaign in West London, amongst other things, and the march, People's March for the NHS that happened in the summer. Some of you may have come to the Trafalgar Square event I organised with Arsha Russell. I want to hopefully cheer you up a little bit, to be honest, because I think we're all feeling a bit down in the dumps. Can I just clarify just a small number of points that will be raised through the afternoon sessions? But, for instance, Andy Burnham has specifically apologised for the market pushing in, both picking up from the Tory years, and has specifically apologised for that too. So I think we are faced with a press that just doesn't give us coverage, and that picks up something that was said this morning. I think, can I ask you all please to read Andy Burnham's 10-year plan from last week, because it very much addresses some of, pretty much everything that's been said about the NHS this afternoon. He addresses in such a way that I think most of you would be at least reasonably happy with. And I find it disappointing that, Jackie has said, oh, we must repeal the Health and Social Care Act, as if that isn't already, part of Labour Party policy. Excuse me? But we also are in an environment where you can't have another full-scale top-down reorganisation, because it will completely spin the medical profession into, an even worse place than they are. It's a 10-year plan. It's not a 2-year plan, but it's a 10-year plan. And Jill, I am sorry, I marched with you. I spent hours and hours, I put my life on hold for 15 months. I absolutely know PFI is a nightmare. So please don't tell everybody that the Labour members of the Save Vision Hospital campaign did not understand PFI. And Andy came to a meeting I chaired the other day, and he was asked a question about PFI, and he said that the issue will be addressed if Labour come into power. PFIs will be addressed, and the bad ones will be, there's a renegotiation element, and so please don't think that PFI is not on the agenda.
Can we pass it over here?
And we're interested in replacing something else, okay?
I'm Austin Hardy from PCS, and by the way, and I just want to make one thing very clear. I'm not just a member of PCS, but I'm on the National Disabled Members Forum. Once upon a time, I got sacked from my job in the civil service in the days when there were no reasonable adjustments, but thanks to the union, fought hard and got my job back. Only people who actually supported me, probably why I still got a job. But I think what is very important I want to talk about is union busting. That hasn't been mentioned today, and this is a new horror that we're waking up to in the 21st century. Now, in America, trade unions don't just fight for plain terms and conditions, they fight against union busting as well. They've got all these multinational companies and teams dedicated to union busting. Now, Leo W. Gerard, the president of the United Steelworkers Union, said on live TV last year, he said that America has got the worst union recognition laws. We may have worse strike laws, but believe me, I can bet any dollar you like, that wasn't me a judge of Joe, but I'm saying that myself, the Tories will bring in these new union derecognition laws. Already they're starting with PCS as we speak. They've announced the abolition of the check-off, and the Home Office, the PCS membership was just about to go down on about 71%, just transferred to direct debit in such a record-breaking speed that no other union could do. It took Unison 10 years to transfer to direct debit in Birmingham City Centre Council. But it's taken, we've been doing it a few months that no other union's been doing, enough to make Roy Castle rise from the grave, record breaking, believe me. But it is frightening, and now they're doing it to the DWP, that's got till March, which is probably nearly 100,000 members, HMRC 45,000 members to the end of April. They're only on 40%, but it's been murder. We had to send full-time officers around the country, even with laptops around the offices to get them transferred to direct debit. No doubt, this Tory government wants to say quite clearly that we've busted trade union, and come the general election, no other party can do this, we're going to send out to all the employers, you do the same as well, bust your trade unions. Now that's the fight we're up against. So I'll make my point very, very clear, and I'll try and round it up generally. We've got to fight back for trade unions. It's not just the Labour Party we've got to claim, but the trade unions themselves. It's no good that we've got indecisive bureaucrats, and I'm sure my GMB comrades will probably sound very too polite to say that. A bit worse than indecisive bureaucrats betraying the workers, some of them are. But I think that's what we've got to do, go out, unionise every workplace, we've got to fight for nationalisation, and we've got to make sure that we get more candidates in the Labour Party, more left-wing candidates, because they're aging. No disrespect, that is true, we need more young, radical left-wing people there, as they get sit in those councils, and the minute they hear cuts, budget cuts announced, they get up in their trade unions and say, right, we're going to call for action, we're prepared to walk out, and we're going to go to our unions and call for industrial action unless you give us more financial support and stop these cuts and more nationalisation. And I just say unionise every workplace. I mean, even the news media, we've got to stop the news media being hostile to the unions, the TV companies as well. Disgraceful. Channel 4 is attacking disabled claimants, making derogatory programmes about them. Did one on a fat gypsy wedding, discriminate against Irish people, and now Channel 4 is my enemy because I'm criticising them for televising that comedy on the Irish famine, which they want to do. And I'll be chairing a panel in 2 weeks' time. I'll be challenging them on that as well, Channel 4, at the Irish Comedy Festival. Please come along in Shoreditch on the 19th of February. But just also, finally want to make clear as well that unionise every workplace, build community trade unions for the disabled. And when I mean every workplace, I also mean the sex workers and adult entertainment industry that go on strike all this today. Because I'm telling you now, I don't care what you think, every worker is a human being. Every worker needs a trade union. And it's all part of the UN regulations, UN resolution, that we should all have trade unions. And if this country denies that, then this is a serious breach of human rights. Let's reorganise, let's get out and start unionising everywhere, and let's make every Labour Party member a member of a trade union, put their trade union first.
Thank you.
My name is Selma James, and I'm from the Global Women's Strike, and I'll try to be very brief, because it's too late to begin making proposals now, so there's only so much scope for having anything to say at all. The first thing is, that's the reason was elected, and that changes everything, and I haven't seen that people are aware of that. A party that is against austerity has not only won an election, but has won a mass movement which is decisive, and which is what I hope we are trying to build. We must build the movement. That is what's going to determine what happens in this country and in the world generally. Now, the welfare state was constructed to save us from the worst aspects of capitalism. Good, but not good enough. We don't want capitalism. I mean, we are not accepting that today. You know, the market has dominated our politics, not only our lives, our jobs, our working conditions, our relations with our kind. It has also dominated the movement, as if somehow we can't break the rules. Somebody said we have to stop the PFI. Yes, we have to break the law. You know, we had to break the law to form the Labour Party. If you don't break the law, you're not bloody serious. It's just how many people do it at once. Okay, I love John Sawaka. I love him because he seems to understand that there is a deep connection between wages and welfare. You know, the way they have attacked wages is precisely by attacking welfare, by making it impossible for us to have anything to fall back on but the miserable, lousy, low-paid, nasty job that they offer us. So when we defend the welfare state, when the sisters and brothers on disability, when those of us who are elderly, when those of us who are women demanding pay equity, when we demand a welfare state, when we say we would like not to take your job so that we can pay a childminder to take care of our children so we can stack the shelves at Tesco, when we say that, we are defending wages. Please understand this. Okay, now the other thing that has not been discussed here is another way of attacking wages. The police. The police attack wages not only in Orgreave, they attack wages every day when they make it impossible for us to protest. They attack wages when they shoot people, you know, and kill them and get away with it. And the Labour Party says nothing. It's infuriating. It's life-threatening. You have to change that. And first of all, we have to change our attitude to it so that we are fit to build the movement we desperately need. Okay. And finally, I mean, there's so much to say on every single subject, but the important, I have to say, the work, you know, there are feminists who are so anti-woman that you can cut it with a knife, and I wish I could cut it with a knife. You know, they think that if you elect them, that women are liberated. They are liberated to buy a bigger house. We get a lower wage, or we get cuts in our welfare, and some people in the Labour Party don't know the difference. They don't know the difference between a feminist in government and a feminist in struggle. Okay? Please note. Okay, I want to just say two other things. First of all, we have to be much more self-critical. You all in the Labour Party are not on the Global Women's Strike. I'm of the left, but in a way I'm not in the left. But they don't want us really. They want men. Anyway, yes. Rotherham is a Labour council. Have you understood what that means to the prospects for Labour? That Labour has allowed the rape of young people and the police not to arrest them, probably benefiting greatly? You have to do something about that. Not discuss your plan for us. We will make our own plans for ourselves massively if we build the movement that we need. But you have to dissociate yourself from the reactionary and murderers. Oh, I'm so glad that we have talked about the people who have died. That's what we work on at our centre as well.
You have to dissociate yourselves from those people. And John has given us every opportunity. He's trying to throw the whole of Parliament open for the movement. He's done everything working alone, but he's been leading in it. But you have to dissociate yourselves from the policy, from the war, from the murder, from the destruction of human relationships on behalf of what? On behalf of the capitalist market. To hell with the capitalist market.
Thank you, John. First of all, I want to thank Deepak, because what they pointed to was a history. Before people with disabilities were called or labelled as scroungers and liars, asylum seekers fleeing rape, and other torture and coming for protection and safety in this country were labelled scroungers, liars, we don't believe anything. And yet it was a Labour government that began to expand the detention of vulnerable people. It was David Blunkett who introduced the detention of children, because he saw in his own constituency that people were ready to defend asylum seekers, were ready to have campaigns, particularly for school children who suddenly were disappeared into these detention centres. So I think we have to note the history and the involvement of the Labour government in bringing in some of the most punitive immigration acts. And I'm here today with members of the All African Women's Group who have done their utmost to spell out what happens when you try to seek asylum, and have spoken and really spelled out what's going on in Yarlswood, the infamous immigration removal centre run by Serco, who had guards raping and sexually abusing women. And the cover-ups that have gone on really since 2005, when women have protested with hunger strikes, have put their lives on the line to reveal what was going on. And this invisibility has continued, and we're a decade later, and we still can't get an independent inquiry, we still can't get that damn prison closed down. And that's what needs to happen. We have to connect the strands that people who are the most powerless in our society are making. Because when we're labelled as scroungers and facing dispersal back in the 90s, that is what has been visited on many of us here in London, sent to places, Wales and Newcastle, go and start a new life because of the council tax caps or whatever. And these are all things that we can connect on. These are not separate struggles, these are struggles that we're all involved in. And I hope many of you today got the leaflet with the demands that asylum seekers are making, and that you will work with us, and also got the petition, because as communities of colour, as people of colour, we are entitled to a whole set of things for the centuries of slavery and for everything that has been taken from us, from our countries, beginning with us, the people of those countries.
The leaders are there, I'll give a plug for a minute.
Hi, my name's Robert Sale. I'm not a member of any party. I'm actually here in a personal capacity, but I'm quite active in an organisation in my home borough of Harrow, the Harrow Patient Participation Network, and my local GP participation group. I also was a trade union shop steward for Unison until I left with mutual agreement with my employer. I think I've echoed the calls here of people who said that some serious things have to be done to the trade union movement, based appeal to younger people, and to get some of the people. It's so depressing that I come here today and I see there's a trade unionist being taken to court by his trade union for determining that socialism is protected. I mean, where are we going? It's so
Take the
depressing.
mic away from you.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. So I think that needs to be done. So, there are certain parts of my union, in Unison, particularly in the London region, where everybody knows what's been. I mean, talk about Jimmy Savile. I'm not talking about what they were doing. I'm clear about that. But everybody knows what's been going on in the London Region Unison as long as I've been a Unison member, and yet no one's done anything about it. It needs to change. People are leaving in droves. It needs to be sorted. The main thing I suppose I've got to say in terms of what's happening where I am, I live in Harrow, which is a marginal constituency, so everyone there is really gunning for trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. I was hoping, I'm in touch with Gareth Thomas, as one of my MPs, I'd hoped he might be here today, and Uma Kumar, who's also standing for Labour there. On the NHS, I'm not here, I think there should be an unequivocal commitment to support the reinstatement of the NHS bill in its entirety. The question of is another mass reorganisation is dealt with by Alison Pollock and others on the website. It is not. And we need to focus on the terrible things that are happening in primary care as well as in the hospitals. Great inspiration I've taken personally from people in this room, one of them sitting next to me, who've organised around hospital campaigns. But the lies that are being told to ordinary people and patients about what is going on in primary care is a disgrace, and sooner or later it's going to blow up. Harrow is a good example. We had a meeting with our local medical committee in our patients' representative groups there a couple of weeks ago. The clinical commissioning group in Harrow is a financial basket case. And please don't film this, but sooner or later you're going to hear probably more about that. That is undermining the whole position that's going on in North West London, and we need to get this out. And the only way to do that is to scrap all this nonsense. No more clinical commissioning groups, no more health watch. Let's have the community health councils back in, and that has to be a commitment. Jamie Reid, because it's Harrow, they're all turning up. I mean, we had Jeremy Hunt down the week before, doing a nice little press release for the local paper saying how wonderful he was in sorting out all the funding. That was a day before we met the local medical committee that said all these services they're supposed to have put in primary care before they shut Hammersmith and Central Middlesex Hospital, which they reneged on. The whole thing's in crisis. None of that's happening. The government are promising. People think their surgery is going to be open 7 days a week, 8 till 8. The quote from the local medical committee in Harrow was, "We'll be lucky if anyone bids for it, and if they do, all you're going to get is a few extra phone calls." We really need to get some of this campaigning on that, and we need a commitment, reinstating the NHS bill in its entirety, and a minimum of the 8 billion that the 5-year health plan said is necessary to put into the NHS. It had to go, and I asked Jamie Reid that, because he came down to a local meeting in Harrow, because they all come down there, and I put that to him. And I got an answer that sounded like something out of McKinsey. I said, 8 billion, no, well, we're going to put 2.5. And I said, no, not 2.5 million, 8 billion. 8 billion new money. And, you know, this is what people want to hear. Unequivocal, no arguments, no ifs, no buts with the NHS.
So try and bring as many people as we can now. People can be disciplined, that would really help.
Thanks. My name is Simon Hewitt. A few speakers have said that we've been agreeing with each other quite a lot. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of what political movements do. From time to time, we need to get together and realise that we're not alone, that there are people who think like us, and we assure ourselves that's okay. But it's not enough. It really is not enough. I'm a member of the Labour Party. It's easier in many circles to admit to being a mass murderer or something like that, something equally terrible, listening to Coldplay. It's when people who do not come to this sort of meeting think about the Labour Party, they think about Tony Blair, they think about the Iraq War. A generation have grown up politicised, thinking about Labour as the party that cuts the welfare state, that brings in the PFI, that goes back on its promises. We have been arrogant, and this is self-criticism as much as anything. We, as the Labour left, have been lazy, and we need to buck our ideas and our action up right now. Otherwise, it will be too late. The Labour Party is effectively dead in Scotland. I am less optimistic than some comrades who've spoken today. It will be dead in England in 5 years' time if we do not sort ourselves out and sort ourselves out now. So, in the cause of not just calling for action like Brian's style, but proposing some, I have 3 suggestions to go away from this meeting with. Firstly, we in the Labour left should start going to Labour Party events and meetings, right? There are admittedly some things that are more pleasurable than this, like sort of disemboweling yourself with a blood spoon. But we need to do it. We need to make our voices audible. Secondly, we need to put PPCs on the spot before the election, not after the election. We need to say, what do you think about rail nationalisation? What do you think about the NHS? What do you think about civil liberties? And the answer to that question will affect how much we campaign for you. We need to be quite blunt about that, and we need to be exactly the same in our unions. The unions should not be writing blank cheques to people who do not support the interests of their members. If Labour MPs want Labour movement money, they should support Labour movement policies. We need to argue for that and argue for it now.
Thank you.
The bakers in the delegation have got to go. I want to bring in Hodgson. The bakers valiantly have organised a fast food campaign, which I think has been one of the breakthrough campaigns in the trade union movement over the last year. Here.
It's always a pleasure to attend anything that John McDonnell does. And what a Labour Party would be, I think we'd be about 20-30 points in front if we'd have got John McDonnell as the leader of the Labour Party. And we'd fight for policies of this country. But there's a hard class instead of representing just the corporate class. The fast food campaign is about organising our communities. It's about talking to people on the streets. It's about taking politics to where we believe it belongs. It belongs on the streets. It belongs with people changing our society. And the fast food rights campaign is saying we're not going to wait for politicians to make changes for us. We're determined to make those politicians realise they have no alternative but to listen to us and be part of change before we make a change of them. And what we're going to see in our society, the society that we want to build, is one where inequality is absolutely not acceptable. And that comes about with, when you talk about slavery, we have modern day slavery in this country. If you're denied the opportunity to feed your family, if you're forced to work or threatened with destitution, we have that today. It's called workfare. So let's start by ending workfare. Let's make sure that one of our red lines, if we have to go in a coalition with anybody, is that the Labour Party commits to abolishing it. And I'll tell you another thing that we want to do on inequality. We don't accept inequality anywhere, and neither should we. So why should we accept it's okay to pay young people a different rate of pay, not because of their skills and their ability to do the job, but merely because of their age? Let's end the inequality, and let's end the youth rate. Let's put an end to inequality in every section of society. And I heard Ed Miliband, he did some good stuff. You know, never underestimate the strength and determination of determined people. People often say size is important, but you ask the people in Hovis in Wigan if size is important. 24 people on 0-hour contracts, our members out on strike, no longer 0-hour contracts, because I'll tell you what, when you stand up, like Mark Hovis says, stand up, fight together, you do win together. Those people, 24 full-time employees, no longer anymore 0 hours contract. And I tell you what we want from the next Labour government is not reform of 0 hours, it's the abolition of 0 hours. We don't want it. We don't want it. The other thing that we want when people go to work, they should be paid a wage that they can live with dignity. And we don't want a living wage, we want a minimum wage of no less than £10 an hour for every single worker in this country. 5 million people out of poverty. 5 million people out of in-work poverty. And I'll tell you what else that does. It means we've got the funds freed up to put in our NHS. It means our taxes being used for the NHS and not corporate welfare. That's what a £10 minimum wage would do. That's how we change our society. It also means that we should be expecting from a Labour Party that introduces that, the abolition so they can get the care. Because I'll tell you what, when we stop making our welfare being used for people in work, and we make the employer pay, rather than cutting benefits to make it look like there's a differential, we can create a society so our elderly can be looked after too, because our taxes will be used for the reasons why they were brought in, which is to support the welfare state, which when you put it together, makes it work, and we're all better off. That's what we should do, solidarity.
The last few people before we start.
Hello, hi. I'm Mary. I'm a PPC in Dwyfor Meirionnydd in North Wales. I'm disabled. I've got ME, arthritis, and dyslexia. Disabled people are being locked out of society. Access to elected office is being abolished in May, which means that disabled people will no longer get funding, like I've got at the moment, to stand as a parliamentary candidate, nor will we have funding to stand and meet our disabled-related costs as council candidates, or in by-elections, or in the London Assembly elections, or in the Welsh Assembly elections. But where do you read about this? Where do you hear about it? It's not being talked about, and this is an absolute assault on democracy. We are being locked out of society. Access to work has got a massive restructure going on at the moment. I was given an access to work grant a year ago. I'm now being sued by a supplier because access to work haven't paid the money that they put in the offer letter to me. They've decided to cut my access to work because as a disabled person I can't work full time and I don't do enough hours apparently. It's a disgrace. Disabled people are being locked out of education, the abolition of disabled student grants, introduction of fees. Where is the hope? Where is the aspiration? Enough is enough. We've got to stop it. Now, I'm co-chair of Disability Labour, and I know we've got a long way to go, and I apologise for not doing as much as I want to, but I can't do it alone. I need help, I need your support. We need to get the word out there that Disability Labour is alive and kicking, and we need to join together and be that change, because a few handful of people can't do it all. We need a movement. If we're not happy with the status quo, then please be part of the change. Join Disability Labour. I've got some forms here. I've managed to broker a massive reduction in fees. To be honest, if I can get some sponsorship, I want to abolish them full stop, because I think it's wrong we charge disabled people, those who are affected most by austerity, a fee to join so they can actually have a political platform. Disability Labour is not part of the Labour Party. It is separate. We have the ability to be able to challenge the Labour Party on its policies. I want to know what is in the manifesto, what is going to happen, what is the offer for disabled people, and I need to fight, and I need your help to fight to make sure it's good enough.
I'm Julie Ward, and I was elected last May as a Labour MP for the North West of England. I've never been in politics in my life before. I'm a poet, I'm a theatre worker. I got really, really upset and angry when the Conservatives got in and austerity happened. I've been working in the north of England, running a cooperative, working with poorest communities for 30 years, working with people with disabilities, working with people with mental health problems. And I couldn't bear what I was seeing in my own community. I put my name forward, and I never ever expected to be elected. I was a reserve on the list. And when somebody dropped out, I was asked to join the list, which meant I'm elected in the North West. I was number 9 on the list, and Labour Party members, grassroots Labour Party members, made me number 3 on the list because I talked about socialism, because I talked anti-austerity, and because I talked about the rising tide of fascism, which is a terrifying prospect for us in Europe. I have been working across the boundaries of the European countries and the world taking young people to meet other young people, to talk about the common global challenges that we all face. And it's these things that led me into politics, to abandon my life as a creative person and to take this fight into Europe, to work with my fellow socialist colleagues there. And I just wanted to make the link between austerity and the way that it divides our communities and ends up making scapegoats of those people who are our brothers and sisters around the world. I'm working in Europe with people who are witnessing back on the streets the rising tide of fascism that brought the Nazis to power. And I am really scared about what is going to happen if we're going to continue othering people, scapegoating them, letting the dominant agenda be everybody else's mistakes. So please, sorry, I feel really emotional about this. This is my first attempt at being in politics, my first attempt at trying to be a public servant representing people in a democratic elected parliament. So thank you for letting me speak. Sorry, I wanted to say more things, but I feel really kind of upset. Sorry, there's one more thing. Because I worked in the arts, I've seen the arts, youth, libraries, community centres, the things that we really value around the cultural and social agenda being completely decimated. These things are the things that give us our value as human beings. They enrich our lives. And if we lose that and we believe the austerity agenda, what's left for us as human beings? Nothing. So I'm with you all. I'm in the European Parliament. I'm probably the only Labour MEP here today, but I'm fighting your cause. Sorry, I feel...
Thank you. Jill Kennett, Hull Red Labour, expelled on the Labour Party for refusing to go over the cuts. I became a councillor in 2011, but in 2010 I want to, if I may, just bring this to a local level around Hull. In 2010, I saw the leader of the newly elected Hull Council standing on Guildhall steps, saying that they would fight the cuts, it would be a new dawn. Well, I was I believed him, so I became councillor the next year. You know, that new dawn has involved compassionate cuts, difficult decisions, and actually, we now are in a position where they're discussing, and this is like in light of things that are being said today, they're actually discussing not having facility time for unions in the new arm's length company that they're devising. We're also discussing reducing facility time in the council in general. This is actually by a group of Labour councillors who continue to tell us about their background being in the union. It's threw me like a stick of rock, one of them said. And also, some of them are actually making speeches about how thrilled they are about Greece. You know, what's that about? Yeah, right. Dean Kirk and I, you know, we didn't vote for the cuts. It's left us as forming a new group. We insisted on calling it Hull Red Labour because we're Labour. It's not us that's moved. We're both lifelong Labour supporters. It's actually been a terrible thing that's happened, you know, that we've had to do. And I say, I don't know what. Undertaking that decision and having to leave a party that we've always believed in, always loved. I grew up hearing about it, it's part of me. I just think, but we didn't have any alternative, and I'm just saying, how do people enable people like us to not vote for the cuts, to not destroy all the terms and conditions that people have died and fought for, without having to leave the very party that is there to do it? So, I'll leave it there.
My name's Matthew, I'm the chair of the LRC and I'm involved with the union and various other things that serve our NHS, and I'm proud to come down today on the train at a very early start. We're proud to be with Dean and Jill, and the LRC in Cole stood side shoulder to shoulder with Dean and Jill, and we were so proud when John and the LRC people came to support us when no one else would, so thank you for doing that. It made a big difference to get a massive turnaround. I just want to pick up on something that Joss said and Jackie. We talked about the vision and talking about the involvement of the Labour Party and the MPs in the council. June 2012, £100 million worth of cuts to Hull Royal Infirmary and our local NHS trust. Absolute carnage. When that was announced, we got a rally together and we got 300 people out there on the streets immediately, and Labour MPs were falling over themselves to join us. They were falling over themselves to be photographed. They were falling over themselves to talk to look north. But as soon as the questions were asked about PFI and about the marketisation of the NHS, we did not see them for dust, and we have not seen them since. They told us to leave the TTIP thing alone. We didn't know what we were talking about. The MP for Harrow North was mentioned. I spoke to him personally, told us to leave it alone. There's only Richard Corbett, an MEP who came to talk on our behalf. Our elected Labour officials have let us down completely, and I'm embarrassed and ashamed to be a member of the Labour Party when things like that happen. 31 years. And thanks to the LRC and to the left to supporting us, we've dusted ourselves down and we're getting on with it. And I'm proud to be with Dean and Jill here today, and thanks for all your support. Thanks a lot.
We'll bring in the last couple of speakers, and then we're going to have a few minutes on next steps. I just want to take people through all the Zooms.
Hi, my name is Sasha Ismail. I'm a member of Workers' Liberty and a supporter of a new initiative called the Socialist Campaign for Labour Victory, which I'll say something about in a minute. But I wanted to begin with a practical point. And it follows on from what a lot of speakers today have said, and it's a problem about the unions and the Labour Party. People have talked about the fact that about all the unions, with the exception of Vector and the Bakers, voting for austerity in the NPF. Apparently, the person who cast United's vote was Steve Turner, who apparently is a senior official of the People's Assembly Against Austerity, which I think sums up the problem. But I want to tell you another example, and then go from just grousing to a practical proposal. I've been involved in an initiative to put pressure on the Labour Party about what it's doing about the NHS. There's a blog, you can check out Labour NHS Lobby. There's been two lobbies at Parliament, two lobbies at the Labour Party conference, a lobby at Parliament, a number of statements. At last year's Labour Party conference, we worked with comp people, we worked with a number of health campaigns, including the Religion campaign, to put together a motion that I think again 9 CLPs submitted to the conference. That motion was ruled out of order. It was ruled out of order by a conference arrangements committee, which has 7 members. And of those 7 members, 4 are representatives of health unions, Unite, GMB, and Unison. And they all voted to rule it out of order. And it seems to me that sometimes we talk as if the left and the unions are just united against Labour leadership, but actually the problem is, by and large, union leaderships are playing parcel for the Labour leadership, and that's nowhere clearer on the NHS. So one of the things I'd like to see come out today is people at least thinking, and maybe if we feel like we can talk about it more practically, about how on certain key issues, be it the NHS, be it union rights, whatever else, we actually start to build networks ahead of steam among union members to put pressure on our unions to actually fight for their own policies in the Labour Party, so that we stop having a situation where the union bureaucracies act as cover for whatever the Labour leadership wants to do. So developing those networks seems to be very important. The last thing I'll say is, one of the things that hasn't really been talked about much at all today is immigration, and it's an absolutely crucial issue. I won't bother explaining why it's crucial, but it's an absolute crucial cutting edge. One of the things that the Socialists and Make Labour Victory is trying to do is put a fight about immigration front and centre. So please take a leaflet, have a look at what we're saying and get involved. Thank you.
Last time speakers, before we just wind up, is two people that are in struggle at the moment. People will have seen what's happening in Barnet. John, explain what you're...
Can I give solidarity greetings from Your Choice Barnet care workers who had a 10% pay cut imposed last April, and they're still taking strike action and are determined to get what they deserve. But operating out of Barnet and in Thatcher's backyard, I do think I do need to share with you what I've done, and I think other people in local government have done, is the extinction event, which is local government. A lot of people don't understand what local government is. They may have some connection with some social care, they may worry about the streets and refuse, but local government, by 2020, will not have any funding. They'll only have a little bit left for social services for children and adults. There'll be no money left. Our branch is facing complete annihilation. £120 million worth of cuts will have been implemented by the Tories by 2020. We've got a 5-year agenda. We've had a massive chunk already taken over by Capita. I've had a year and a half dealing with Capita. I could talk forever on that subject. This is a massive check. This is a massive impact on people, pay and inequalities. And I think it's interesting listening to people talking about the union, the bureaucracy, lay people like me. I'm elected, I'm not paid. And I think we've got to sort our house in order. But I just want to finish on one thing. You've got to give workers something. You've got to give workers, Labour have got to give workers something to vote for. You can't use them, we can't, and I'm in the Labour, can't be used as voting fodder. We can't just say beware of Cameron and the Tories, because I'm not hearing that an extinction event for local government, and I am not making it up, it is 2020, there is no money for any councils, and if you're looking at the A&E crisis, it's because large part of the A&E crisis is because the council cuts the social care, means they don't have any money for the care workers who can support them in the community. That's the connection that's not made. Thank you very much.
I'm Candy O'Gwyn. I'm here with two other strikers from the National Gallery, and we're on our 5th day of strike action today. And the speaker said earlier that the way that museums and galleries and the arts, what kind of way that they're run in this country is a reflection of the kind of society that we have. And that's why we think our strike is so important, because it's not just that if 400 out of the 600 staff are privatised, then that will be an attack on their pay and conditions. And it is a scandal that in the National Gallery, where they have literally hundreds of millions of pounds that get spent on one painting, they cannot pay the staff who look after them the London living wage. And this is Mark Getty, the chair of the trustees, who is pushing this through. But it is also the case that those people who provide those services know and love the paintings and care about them, and they're not just security guards. And this is not just a gallery that should be aimed at making money. It should be something that is there for everybody and about education and pleasure for everyone. What I can't tell you about, apart from holding this up, is what's happened to me, because I'm not allowed to talk about it. But if they thought that they could intimidate us by all of the things that they've done, including suspending me, then they're absolutely wrong. And I will say, it could give us all heart, actually, that people who don't earn the London living wage have been prepared to go on strike for 5 days, and actually today are saying they've got a meeting next week and they're planning to do the same thing again, if that's what they have to do. But it also can give us heart, I think, that people all over the country, over 40,000 people, have signed our petition, have donated thousands of pounds towards our campaign fund and are backing us. And, you know, the same at Barnet. And that is a bit of a taste, I think, of the resistance that we need if we are going to win the policies that people are talking about. So have your photograph taken this, and please do support us. Thanks very much.
I wanted Candy to be the last speaker from the floor because this is what we're about. Candy symbolises what we're about as a movement. A group of people willing to stand up and fight. She was suspended and because of a straightforward policy of victimisation. That's what this is about. And we stand together to protect her. Let me just say this, we're winding up now with the issues around where we go from here. Let me just say why this was convened. This is the first time in a long time all the organisations on the left of the Labour Party have come together to work together. Now that might not sound a lot. It's a near bleeding miracle, to be frank. Every left organisation has signed up and sponsored this, so it was important at this key stage, and someone said, yes, we should have done this earlier, we should have done, but maybe it wasn't practical or possible earlier. But I think there's a sense of urgency now. I think there's a real sense of urgency. We could be in a situation where either we lose the Labour government because the Labour leadership is not actually promoting the policies that will attract the votes, or we go into government on a minority or in a coalition and we lose a way and our policies are ignored. So it's absolutely critical that we got together today. First of all, as a point of principle, to demonstrate that we can work together. Secondly, I think it's absolutely important as well, what people have said time and time again, it was important that people denied the idea that we didn't have a narrative. The Labour leadership and Ed Balls might not have a narrative, but we have on the left. We understand our society, and we understand, as you've demonstrated today, what needs to be done. Don't we? Yeah. Speech after speech of policy people who are experts in analysis, people who are more expert because they're activists on the ground, people who have experienced and lived the life, the cuts and all the rest, are the real experts, and we've set that agenda today. Where do we go from here? We're going to put the film up on the web as quickly as possible, so people out there know we've met these discussions that took place. We'll write this up as well. We'll write up the ideas that people have put forward and circulate them around as widely as possible. But those ideas that you've heard today, someone said earlier, I think it was yourself, go to every parliamentary candidate for Labour now and ask them, are you backing us? Are you supporting us? Are we going to have Alison Pollock's bill implemented under Labour? Will you back that? Will you end privatisation? Will you support rail renationalisation? I think now we go out and we ask every candidate standing for Labour that this is what we want them to stand on, and we eyeball and front them, to be honest. And then in the campaigning weeks that come, those of us who are candidates and those of us who are campaigners, we publish these policies and we campaign them. Because out there, people want to see a real Labour government. There is support there. We could save the Labour Party from being destroyed at this election if people understand there's a Labour left alive and kicking and fighting for these policies. And that's what we're going to do from here on in. I'm going to put to this as well. After the election, we want to reconvene the left platform. We want to reconvene it as quickly as we possibly can, ideally on the Sunday after the election itself. If we can't do that, at least in that following week. Because if there is only a minority Labour government, if there's coalition discussions going on, it is absolutely critical that we meet and we influence those conversations, those negotiations, and the whole climate of those negotiations. Otherwise, we will be ignored. And what we've got to do after this election, if Labour is in a small majority or a minority position negotiating, we've got to make sure we create a climate of opinion that the policies we're putting on the table are addressed. And to be frank, it will be tough. If it's like under Blair, even when we had the largest majority possible, Blair was very clever. What he did, he introduced the first cuts. And you remember the first vote we had as Labour MPs was on cutting child benefit. It was to test the water. It was to introduce the first, can you remember, a year of absolute stagnation, the inheritance and implementation of the Tory budget. We don't want to be caught out like that again. If Labour is in a minority government or in coalition, we've got to weld together our own coalition within the Labour Party, beyond the Labour Party campaign organisation, in the trade unions, So when the first decisions are made, we're strong enough to say this is what we want, and we force them on the agenda, and we resist the austerity measures that Balls might be trying to introduce at that stage. So we will reconvene in that first week after the general election. I'm hoping we have a Labour government with a Labour majority. The reality is there's probably a Labour government with a tiny majority or a hung parliament. That's when we play a key role on the left again. No Labour government can survive without the support of the left. That's when our time will come. So from today we go out there, we campaign from my view, we campaign for Labour candidates, supporting our policies, we put them on the agenda, and then we reconvene after the election to make sure we are a force to be reckoned with on the left again. Solidarity, and thanks for coming today. Jeremy wants to make sure that we do not lose the foreign policy agenda, so we're going to also do something else.
Yeah, thanks, John. We need to summarise everything that John said and get that widely circulated. So we're talking to each other, we're in communication with each other, that builds solidarity, and those candidates that want support from existing MPs, you know where to contact us if we can be of any help on that. I made a big point on the international policy. I don't like the word foreign policy, I prefer international policy, and I'm suggesting, email me if it's not a good idea, that we hold such a conference on the 30th of May. That seems to be a suitable gap between the election and the development of policy. But if there's a big reason that anybody knows why it shouldn't be that date, please email me and then we'll look for another date. But that's my idea, bringing together all the international elements within our Labour movement. Thank you very much, John.
Can we thank the person who's done all the work for this, Seth Corbyn, where is it?
It's sad about Arsenal.
Unfortunately for him, Arsenal just lost the Spurs, but Seth, thank you very much for all you've done. Thanks for turning up today, very grateful.
I suppose you think that's funny.